Today, I'm going to show you how to use graduated and radial filters in Lightroom. Hey guys, and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace, and you can find me on Phlearn.com, where we make learning fun. And in today's episode, I'm going to show you how to use a graduated filter as well as a radial filter in Lightroom. Now, these are incredibly powerful tools, and they really come in handy when you want to edit specific parts of your photo. We're going to show you how to use both of these filters to make a dramatic difference in your images. Guys, we got a great episode. Let's go ahead and jump into Lightroom. So here's our image for today, and we're going to be editing different parts of this image using our different filters. Now, you can actually download this exact image on Phlearn.com. Just follow the link in the description right down below. So right now we're in our library module, and this is mostly used for organization and filtering, things like that, of your photos. Now, to edit the photos here in Lightroom, I'm going to go to the develop module. There we go. And here on the very top, you're going to see your basic adjustments. Here's where we can adjust things like our exposure and our white balance, highlights and shadow level, and things like that. Now you're going to notice as I move my slider, it's affecting my entire image, which can be sometimes really helpful. But let's say I don't want my entire image to get brighter or darker. I just want to choose specific areas of my photo. Well, that's where our graduated filters come in. So before we start adding our graduated filters, I'm going to go here on the left-hand sidebar and create a snapshot. So let's hit this plus icon, okay, and we'll just call this before. There we go. So we have a snapshot for the before. That way, if I want to come back to this at any point in time, I just click here and it's going to give me how the image started out. Okay, so our graduated and radial filters are located right up here on the top right sidebar here in the develop module. So let's go ahead and click first on our graduated filter. So clicking on there, you can see basically we have a nice drop down here that basically gives us the controls just like we have here in our basic adjustments, but now they're only going to be affecting a certain part of our image. So let's just, as a little test here, I'm going to click and drag from the top down, and you're going to see it's going to start to darken the top of my image. Now the reason it's doing that is this is where your controls are, so just keep in mind, if you click here on your graduated filter, the controls for it are right here. So the reason it's darkening down this area is because right now the exposure is set to negative. But I can click there and bring it up, and it's going to brighten the exposure in that area. Okay, let's go ahead and brighten it up, and we'll show you how the graduated filter actually works. So if I hover over it for just a minute, you can see what areas are actually affected. Now I can click here and drag this up and down, okay? And basically on one side it's going to have our exposure settings, how we set it, and on the other side it's going to be transparent, okay? And the line here between this line and that line, that dictates how smooth your transition is going to be. For instance, if I have it just this light, let's go bring our exposure up even more so you get an idea here. So if we have these two lines very close together, you can see we have a very harsh transition. If I click on the bottom line and bring it out a little bit more, you're going to see our transition is going to be a lot smoother. Now you can also rotate this. So moving our cursor to the right-hand side here, I can simply click and rotate this around so we have basically different areas of highlights. Now in this case, keep in mind, I have my exposure brought all the way up to a +4. That's why it's getting so bright. But you don't have to use exposure here. You have access to all of these tools, like your clarity and your saturation and sharpness and things like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and rotate this back around. There we go. That looks pretty good. And we'll go ahead and bring our exposure back down again. Now, let's say we want to just delete this guy, okay? Because it looks good, but that's actually not the change that I want to make. So all you have to do is click on there and hit the delete key on your keyboard, and it's going to delete just that filter because you can use multiple filters at the same time. So let's jump in and show you how to do that. So in this case, I actually do want to add a couple of filters because the right side of the image is super dark and the left side's a bit dark as well. So let's grab a graduated filter here. I'm going to click and drag from the left just like this. Okay, now by default, it's bringing my exposure down. So I'm just going to bring the exposure up just a little bit. And we're going to bring our saturation down on that side, which is going to help draw more attention to the center area where we have some more color. We'll do the same thing on our right-hand side. So this graduated filter, it's good to go. To add another, simply click and drag from the other side here. There we are. And in this case, I'm just going to bring our exposure up just a little bit more. And let's spread that out so it actually reaches our subject. All right. And we can bring our saturation up a little bit. Now in this case, you can see the black levels here are not as dark as I would like. This did help. You can see it did help brighten up my background, but the black levels here, there's like a little bit of like yellow in them. So I'm going to go ahead and take my black levels and just bring that to the left. Okay, and now we have our black levels where we want, but we can still see this area is getting brightened significantly, all this things like that in the background. So we've used a couple of different graduated filters together to both brighten up the left side and the right side of our image. Now let's go ahead and jump into a radial filter, which we can use for just the center of the image around our subject. So to get to your radial filter, it's right next to our graduated filter. So here's our graduated filter. Let's click on that. It's going to close it down and click on our radial filter, and we're going to open up our radial filter. Now, really just the same way to use this. Click and drag out from the center. Okay, and this side, instead of using a graduated, like from one side to another, it's going to do this in a radial manner. Now, you can see in this case, it's actually, our setting here is to bring the exposure way down, okay, which that kind of does look cool, but that's obviously not what we want. The case right here is it's bringing the exposure down outside of my circle, right? Like as I bring the exposure up or down, this is happening outside of the circle. So what we can do here is right at the very bottom, you can invert this mask. So instead of bringing the exposure down here in the center, instead of bringing the exposure down on the outsides, it's going to affect this center. So this basically says, are you going to affect the outside of your circle or the inside? Okay, so now that it's affecting the inside of our circle, we don't want to bring our exposure down. That doesn't look too good. Let's go ahead and bring our exposure up just a little bit. Okay, we can alter this radial filter. Simply click on the middle and you can click and drag and move it around. Okay, you can click here on the bottom and stretch it out a little bit. There we go. And you can adjust your feathering. So for instance, if we wanted a harder edge, we can have it be a hard edge, which in this case doesn't look realistic at all, so I hope you don't do that. Or we can bring our feathering up, giving it a softer edge, making the effect a little bit more subtle. Okay. Now in this case, let's go ahead and start adjusting this to how we want, because I can affect the lighting in this area of the photo, which I think is really cool. So let's go ahead and bring our highlight level down just a little bit. I'm going to bring my shadow level up. So what we're doing is kind of evening out the exposure on our subject. All right, we can bring our exposure up just a little bit, and I'm going to bring the contrast level down, and we'll bring our saturation up. That's just going to give us like those really nice green. There we go. That looks really nice. All right, now in this case, I brought the saturation up, but it's kind of too saturated on my subject. So we're just going to bring that back down a little bit. There we go. And we'll do another radial filter for just our saturation. Okay, so I think this looks pretty great. Let's bring our clarity up just a little bit. That's going to help draw attention to our subject. Okay, we're going to create another snapshot. There we go. And we're going to call this radial. And hit enter. So here we have our before. So this is our image before we did any adjustments, and this is after our graduated and our radial adjustments. So you can see this is incredibly powerful, and you can use these tools to affect certain parts of your photos. Now we're going to add one more radial filter. We'll use that to increase the saturation of our image, and then I'm going to paint out just our subject's face. Jumping back in here, let's grab our radial filter. Now if I click on my radial filter and hover over my image, you're going to see my other filter. So I can always click on this other radial filter and move it at any time. Okay? But in this case, let's go ahead and click here off and then back on, and we can create a new radial filter. So I'm going to click here in the middle and drag out just like this. Now this one, basically I just want to affect maybe saturation and a little bit of color temperature. Okay, so again, we need to hit the invert mask button. Okay, let's bring our exposure down to 0, and I'm going to make our temperature just a little bit warmer. There we are, and I'm going to bring our saturation up. That's going to help draw attention to the center of our photo. Now in this case, we can see that our subject's skin really doesn't look that good. And the reason is because we're adding saturation. See, it looks way better there. We're adding saturation and warmth to this whole area, but it's also affecting our subject's skin. So we can actually mask this radial filter, which is actually really helpful. So let's click here on our brush tool where it says mask. You can click on brush. There we go. And then hold it's got a little plus icon. You can see it here in the dark. It's got a plus icon, which would add to our mask, or if I hold Alt or Option, it's going to subtract from our mask, which is helpful. So let's hold Alt or Option here, and I'm going to simply paint on our subject, and what this is basically doing is it's telling this radial filter to not be visible where I'm painting. There we go. So we're going to have a much more natural color on our subject. All right, and you have your controls here for your brushes right down here on the bottom. Maybe add a little bit more color back into his hair. And just a little bit here. All right. Let's bring our flow down a little bit. Just subtracting a little bit of color out of our subject. Okay, so there we have it. And if I hover right over here, we can see we have a radial filter, but you can see the mask now is not including parts of our subject, especially his neck and things like that, where it was just a little bit too colorful. Okay, well, that looks great. So let's go ahead and create one more snapshot. I'll just call this Final. Okay, and this is including a graduated filter from the left, one from the right, and 2 radial filters here in the center. Well, that's basically how we use our graduated and radial filters in Lightroom. Let's go ahead and take a look at our before and after. So here's our image before and after our graduated and radial filters. So you guys can see what a huge difference this can make in your photo, and it's extremely easy to use in Lightroom. So if you want to do this on your own photos, just follow these steps. First, import your photo and navigate to the Develop module in Lightroom. Next, open up the right-hand sidebar in the Develop module and click on your graduated filter icon. Click and drag on your image and you'll notice the controls automatically appear on the right-hand side. You can move a graduated filter by clicking and dragging on the center point. You can also rotate it around the center line, and you can change the feathering using the external lines in the graduated filter. To use a radial filter, simply click on the icon right next to the graduated filter, and here you can choose to invert your mask, affecting only the area inside of the radial filter. You're going to have access to all the same tools you did in the graduated filter, and you're going to have the ability to add a mask, so you can either add or subtract from certain areas of your graduated or radial filters. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope today's episode helped out, and don't forget you can download this image. Just follow the link in the description right down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll Phlearn you later. Bye, everyone.